Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Mr Lumsden on his first speech to the Chamber and to the Cabinet Secretary on her taking up her new position in the Government. As I rise to give my first speech in the Chamber of the Scottish Parliament, I recall a formative political experience sitting in a bed at Yorkhill Hospital as a 10-year-old, transfixed by the opening ceremony of the Scottish Parliament on television as it unfolded up on the Mound in 1999. The excitement and optimism of that day remains vividly etched in my mind. Sheena Wellington's rousing rendition of Is There for Honest Poverty, Dure's exhortation that the establishment of this Parliament must not merely be an end, but a means to greater ends. As I watched one great Labour achievement come to fruition from another, perhaps my political affiliation was inevitably influenced from that moment onwards. It was not merely the spectacle of that day that influenced my interest in politics, but the experience of growing up in a family that bore the brunt of the industrial turmoil of Clydeside in the 1990s. The anxiety of unemployment as redundancy struck the shipyards, taking the job of my father along with many hundreds of others. It burned into me a sense of anguish at seeing an industry synonymous with Glasgow's purpose, the work, the pride of generations in decline, presided over by an aloof political establishment indifferent to its fate. The economic dogma of the free market, serving the interests of a distant few, mattered more than the dignity and wealth of Glaswegians. I also realised that this decline was not inevitable, that there is no such thing as honest poverty, that it is something that government could reverse with a sense of clear mission, innovation and determination. One of the first actions of the Labour government and of this new Parliament was to save the Govan shipyard from closure. It was an act that not only restored my dad's livelihood, but would later give me work too. Although burning for a passion for Glasgow and everything it represents, instilled from a young age, I could scarcely have imagined that the circumstances would prevail just a few years later, where I would have the precious opportunity to represent this teeming, turbulent, tremendous city in Parliament, first as an MP in the House of Commons, and now as a member of the Scottish Parliament. William McIlvanney described Glasgow as the right hand knocking you down and the left hand picking you up, while the mouth alternated apology and threat. His character Laidlaw described what he loved about Glasgow as that it's not a city, it's a 24-hour cabaret. And if it isn't already this week, I'm sure it will be by Saturday night. I'm sure Pauline will be offering us a song or two down the pub. It's certainly a city of contrasts, a tumultuous mix of triumph, hilarity, misery and tragedy. And to have the honour of representing and helping its persevering, passionate people in Parliament has revealed to me a whole new level of understanding about their needs and how government policy so often misunderstands, underestimates and ill-serves them. Until you find yourself at the mercy of an oppressive, inhumane policy or unexpectedly advocating for those who do, it's easy to just assume that the system works. The realisation that it doesn't drives my motivation to improve my city, my community. My initial naivety might have given way to an even greater resolve and fervour to help those who are vulnerable and oppressed. But I hope it is a conviction that is widely shared by colleagues across this chamber. It was certainly a conviction shared by my two predecessors, James Kelly and Joanne Lamont, who were formidable advocates for our communities, from expunging draconian legislation that criminalised working-class football fans to speaking out against the government's illegal failure to house the homeless of Glasgow. Patricia Ferguson and the late Maria Fife also inspired me with their fearless pursuit of social justice for the people of Milton and Springburn, where I grew up. This is an intergenerational moral crusade that has never been more urgent, but this Parliament and this government is barely keeping pace. In the half-decade it has taken to set up a modest £10 a week child payment, child poverty has risen by 50,000. By this government's own estimations, the £10 a week child payment will reduce the number of children living in poverty by just 20,000. Meanwhile, in Glasgow alone, over 30,000 children live in poverty. Not only is it an intolerable situation, it is an indictment of a lack of ambition and a lack of political will. We are consciously planning an economy that fails tens of thousands of children And I won't stand by while that happens, and neither will my colleagues. That is not something we can tolerate anymore. The late Jimmy Reid once looked up at a block of high-rise flats in Glasgow and observed that behind every window could be a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, an Olympic athlete, or perhaps a First Minister. But you know what? They will never get the opportunity because of where they were born and the circumstances in which they were brought up. From birth, they have been denied their potential. As a nation and as a community, that tacitly accepted sabotage of young people's lives is the greatest loss to us all as a country. And in many cases, it is literally a life sentence. I've seen it at first hand, working with Peter Crikent at the overdose prevention pilot in Glasgow, where we witness daily the impact of social alienation and trauma on so many young lives. We can only hope that they will still be alive tomorrow, failed by a state that prioritises criminalisation over compassion. There is nothing inevitable about this economic and social trauma. It can be fixed if we, the 129 of us here, are willing to take a lead. After all, this is the Parliament that was forged in the furnaces of Ravenscraig and welded together on the banks of the Clyde. Our mission is to build up our industries, not simply stand by and observe their decline. It was heartbreaking for me to watch the convener of the Calais Railway Works in Springburn break down in tears in this building 2 years ago, as he realised he was the last in a long line of trade union leaders stretching back 163 years to the dawn of the railway industry, because government ministers failed to do what was necessary to preserve those precious skills and jobs. This Parliament failed those workers, and it failed my community. What is the meaning of home rule if our industries are ruled by faceless men in boardrooms far from Scotland, and our government isn't prepared to defend them, or simply indulges in shallow PR that later ends in failure? I won't stand by and let the same happen to the McVitie's workers in Tollcross, and neither will my colleagues. As Edwin Morgan said, we are adept at indulging in convenient Scottish fictions. Unless this Parliament urgently becomes more alive to the alienation, exploitation and hardship faced by millions of Scots, unless we have the privilege of working in this chamber, test our Parliament's ability to address those ills more strenuously than ever, our country will never achieve its full potential. It's a tremendous challenge in front of all of us, but it's an endeavour that I will be relentlessly and humbly focused on over the next 5 years. Thanks.
Thank you.